Hey kids, um, this is a piece by John Molyneux. It's titled "How Not to Interpret Trotsky Again." And this article first appeared in Critique, 1978. Reading this is it's from the book Ideas of Leon Trotsky, edited by Hillel Ticktin and Michael Cox. So here we go. Leon Trotsky has been reasonably well served by biographers, but there has long been a need for a clear, concise, and comprehensive presentation of his main political ideas. Unfortunately, this book does not meet this need. Footnote. The book being referred to as Baruch Knei-Paz's The Social and Political Thought of Leon Trotsky. End footnote. I'm going to say right now that the reason that Molyneux probably does not care for this book, The Social and Political Thought of Leon Trotsky, is because Social and Political Thought of Leon Trotsky is a critical book and not a book in support. John Molyneux is a member of the Socialist Workers' Party, Cliffist Trotskyism in the UK. So, obviously, if the book is anything but pro-Trotsky, in general, as opposed to like here and there, if anything, it's like if there's anything, too critical of Leninism, particularly, it's not going to get a rave review from someone of the political leanings of John Molyneux. Anyway, I finished reading Baruch Knei-Paz just the other week, and so maybe by the time this is up, that book I don't know, this might go up before all of them, but you'll eventually, at the very least, be able to read the entirety of Baruch Knei-Paz's book by listening to the recordings I made on this channel. God, that felt long-winded to say all that. I'm sorry. In the first place, is extremely long-winded and repetitive. Oh, well, that sounded like me then. Which makes it rather tedious reading. Knei-Paz has little talent for the succinct summary. If one is prepared to read 230-odd pages to find out about the theory of permanent revolution, one would do much better to read Permanent Revolution and Results and Prospects themselves. Apart from anything else, Trotsky is a much better writer than Knei-Paz. Secondly, although Knei-Paz is extremely scholarly when it comes to Trotsky himself, he seems to have read a considerable amount of Trotsky's truly vast output. Knei-Paz's knowledge of the rest of Marxist thought and the Marxist movement is based very much on second-hand sources, and poor sources at that. Thus, for, quote, the relationship between Lenin the thinker and Lenin the doer, end quote, we are told on page 437 to see Leonid Shapiro and Peter Redaway's Lenin, the Man, the Theorist, the Leader, a truly abysmal collection of essays. I don't really see any description of this book. Anyway, back to the text. For a survey of theories of the Soviet Union, we are recommended on page 439, of all things, Daniel Bell's The End of Ideology. The effect is therefore rather like a portrait from life set against a background of cheap reproduction landscape. Wikipedia says The End of Ideology on the Exhaustion of Political Ideas in the 50s is a collection of essays published in 1960 by Daniel Bell, who described himself as a, quote, socialist in economics, a liberal in politics, and a conservative in culture, end quote. Daniel Bell suggests that the older, grand humanistic ideologies derived from the 19th and 20th centuries had been exhausted and that new, more parochial ideologies would soon arise. Daniel Bell argues that political ideologies become irrelevant among, quote, sensible people, and that the polity of the future would be driven by piecemeal technological adjustments of the extant system. With the rise of affluent welfare states and institutionalized bargaining between different groups, Daniel Bell maintains, revolutionary movements which aim to overthrow liberal democracy will no longer be able to attract the working classes. There is a 1930s literature derived from debates about the continued relevance of the Marxist scheme of class-generated ideologies, even in the less reductionist versions set forth in most of Karl Mannheim's Ideology and Utopia. However, his essay on Utopia does envision a loss of both utopian and ideological vision. Fascism rather than communism initially posed the question, insofar as the simplification of fascism as, quote, ideology of the capitalist class lost credibility. One current of thought took up the theme of, quote, mass society, and contended that the modes of control and resistance both had little to do with the ideology concept. See Emile Lederer's, quote, the state of mass society. Although much of this was conjoined with conservative arguments about the, quote, revolt of the masses, there was also a current that looked to pragmatic problem-solving where fascism, and increasingly communism, could be resisted or contained. Karl Mannheim's, quote, planning, end quote, writings ambiguously fostered this trend. Daniel Bell belonged to the next generation, when ideas about the institutionalization of intelligence in ordinary democratic political processes became more sophisticated, as in the work of, quote, pluralist political theorists like David Truman, Robert Dahl, and Daniel Bell. Technocratic notions at home on the right played little part. Back to the text. But the book, Baruch Knei-Paz's book, has a much more serious defect, namely that Knei-Paz approaches Trotsky as a bourgeois academic with a bourgeois academic's priorities and values. Knei-Paz sees Trotsky principally as a theorist of, quote, backwardness and of revolution in the, quote, backward countries. And Knei-Paz wants to situate Trotsky in the context of debates on industrialization and modernization. The focus of the study is thus almost entirely on the theory of permanent revolution and permanent revolution's consequences in Russia. In a work that claims to be reasonably comprehensive, this leads to a serious distortion of Trotsky's thought. For the world proletarian revolution, as an essentially international phenomenon, which for Trotsky was absolutely central throughout his life, is, as far as Knei-Paz is concerned, something peripheral to be added on as an afterthought to the writing on Russia. Thus, quote, Trotsky's innumerable writings of the 1920s and 1930s on political events in Britain, France, Spain, etc. have been largely ignored, ... They are, ... of little theoretical interest, end quote. Baruch Knei-Paz. End quote. It would be merely tedious and today hardly illuminating to follow Trotsky's writings during the 1914 to 24 period on revolutionary developments in the various individual European countries, end quote. Baruch Knei-Paz. The same criterion is applied to Trotsky's work in exile and his struggle to build the Fourth International. Now Trotsky himself considers this to be the most important work of his career, and one does not have to be an uncritical Trotskyist or a partisan of the Fourth International to see this point. To see Trotsky's point. For Trotsky at that time was struggling virtually alone to defend and develop genuine Marxism, crushed by the dead weight of Stalinism, and to prepare the future world revolution. However much one might disagree with Trotsky here, the fact remains that the work of this period is a major component of Trotsky's political thought, and it should find a place in a, quote, comprehensive study of that thought. But it doesn't. Quote, Trotsky's writings of 1929 to 40 are on the whole of purely historical interest today, and only peripherally valuable as sources of Trotsky's social and political thought, end quote. Knei-Paz. It is worth listing some of the things that are left out completely or mentioned only in passing as a result of Knei-Paz's approach. The analysis of the crisis of capitalism, the theory of the United Front, the critique of popular frontism, surely of great relevance today after Chile and Eurocommunism, the notion of the counter-revolutionary role of Stalinism internationally, the theory of transitional demands, the role of trade unions under capitalism, the attitude to the Second World War, and much more. In other words, those aspects of Trotsky's thought that pertain to the strategy and tactics of revolution, which could possibly serve as a guide to action in the here and now, are entirely omitted. Even on its own chosen ground of the theory of permanent revolution, there is much to quarrel with in this account. Knei-Paz's central argument runs as follows. Trotsky failed to distinguish succinctly between industrialization and modernization, and on the basis of limited economic development exaggerated the extent to which Russia had become socially modernized. This, according to Knei-Paz, led Trotsky to predict and to work for a socialist revolution for which Russia was socially unready. In the event, this premature revolution could only be achieved through, quote, the substitute link, end quote, of the Bolshevik Party, which imposed the revolution from above, and this, of course, is the basic explanation of Stalinism, which grew out of the attempt to impose upon society a social revolution for which society was unprepared, and which therefore could be carried out only through the largely autonomous activity of the state and the state's institutions of coercion. Thus, Knei-Paz's book is yet another episode in the long-running posthumous defense of Menshevism. Quote, the pessimism or cautious reservations of the more orthodox Russian Marxist ... was better grounded in Russian reality than the optimism of Trotsky, end quote. And arrives once again at the familiar equation of Leninism with Stalinism. Unfortunately for Menshevism, the argument is unsound at each stage. First, it is nonsense to say that Trotsky exaggerated the social modernization of Tsarist Russia, since the whole theory of permanent revolution was formed on this being an impossibility. If social modernization had been possible under Tsarism, then either there would have been no revolution at all. If social modernization had been possible under Tsarism, then either there would have been no revolution at all, or the revolution would have been led by the bourgeoisie. Equally absurd is Knei-Paz's contention that, quote, very little, end quote, had really changed in Russia, quote, only segments of the formal economic framework, end quote. If that were so, then the events not only of 1917, but also of 1905, would be truly inexplicable. What had changed, of course, was the emergence of a numerically small, but in the context of a weak and timid bourgeoisie, politically decisive urban proletariat, and that is precisely what Knei-Paz misses. Trotsky's conviction that, quote, the Russian proletariat was an independent, vital revolutionary force, end quote, is described as, quote, either perverse or simply naive, end quote. It is because he, quote, does not see, end quote, the revolutionary proletariat of 1917 that Knei-Paz is only able to conceive of the relationship between the Bolsheviks and the working class as one of imposition of revolutionary goals. Trotsky in 1917, we are told, became, quote, aware that left to their own initiative the masses might compromise with less than now seemed to him. The masses might compromise with less than now seemed to him attainable, end quote. But this was not at all the main problem of 1917, for there was abundant evidence of the proletariat's revolutionary aspirations. There was a real danger, however. What was a real danger, however, was the possibility that the workers and soldiers would go into action, as they did in the July days, spontaneously and without a clear plan, and consequently be decisively defeated. The role of the Bolshevik Party was not at all to impose socialist aims on a reluctant working class, but to provide the existing elemental revolt of that class with organization and a coherent strategy. Furthermore, it is because Bolshevism achieved that relationship with the working class that Stalinism was unable to triumph as a straightforward evolution from Bolshevism. Rather, it required, firstly, the destruction, dispersion, and exhaustion of the proletarian vanguard as a result of the Civil War and economic disintegration. Secondly, the bureaucratic degeneration of the party. Thirdly, the revision of the party's theory and program. And finally, the complete annihilation of its old guard, all of which involved a long and bitter internal struggle. Knei-Paz claims that there is a contradiction in Trotsky's analysis of Stalinism in that, on the one hand, he showed the social and historical roots of Stalinism, yet he maintained at the same time that it was, quote, in principle avoidable, end quote. But there is no contradiction here. Trotsky never suggested, as Knei-Paz claims, that Stalinism, quote, was merely an aberration, an accident almost, end quote. But to reveal the historical roots of a phenomenon in no way involves asserting that history could have taken no other course. That is a ludicrous determinism. In a particular historical situation, a number of courses of development may be possible, each of which will have profound social roots. Knei-Paz's argument against the specific alternative advocated by Trotsky, the spreading of the revolution, that material aid from socialist Europe would not have made a decisive difference, as shown by the, quote, persistent problems confronting underdeveloped countries today, no matter what the extent of the material aid they receive, end quote, is based on a truly amazing equating of socialist cooperation with, quote, aid as imperialism, end quote. Of course, the ideas on which Knei-Paz bases his critique of Trotsky are neither unusual nor original. In broad outline, they have long been dominant in this academic field, and a review is no place for their detailed refutation. The point is, however, that the painstaking application of their ideas to Trotsky's thought has failed to generate any striking insights. The, quote, contradictions, end quote, he purports to discover are largely illusory, and the genuine, quote, problem areas, end quote, in Trotsky's Marxism, the tension between Trotsky's authoritarianism and his commitment to workers' democracy in the 1920s, his vacillations in the struggle against Stalin, the limitations of his theory and strategy when applied to advanced Western Europe, are sometimes noted but never investigated. There are many other criticisms, both general and particular, that could be made of this work, but enough has been said to show that it cannot be regarded as a satisfactory, not to speak of definitive, account of Trotsky's thought. It is a pity to have to condemn so thoroughly a book that is evidently the product of great labor and considerable, though limited, scholarship, and there is no doubt that it will serve a useful function for further work in this field. But the moral would appear to be that Trotsky and liberal academicism do not mix well. The end. Thank you so much for listening.